This podcast brought to you by Ring. With Ring cameras, you can check on your pets to catch them in the act.
Izzy, drop that.
Or just keep them company.
Aw, I'll be home soon.
Make sure they're okay while you're away. With Ring. Learn more at ring.com/pets.
Today on CityCast Boise, homelessness is a persistent and growing struggle for our city. Between ongoing construction of a newer, larger shelter, a U.S. Supreme Court decision to criminalize outdoor camping, and our city council voting to phase out funding for temporary housing, there are a lot of moving pieces. The director of one of Boise's shelters is joining me to explain what all of these things could mean for our city and our homeless residents. It's Monday, August 5th. I'm Lindsay Van Allen, and this is what Boise's talking about. Joining me is Jody Peterson-Steigers, Executive Director of Interfaith Sanctuary. Thanks for joining me, Jody.
Thanks for having me, Lindsay.
So there are so many complicating factors at play for Interfaith Sanctuary right now. There's the Supreme Court decision, construction of the new shelters, city funding for the Red Lion ending. What issue is the biggest priority for you right now?
Well, I would say the biggest issue is always taking care of our unhoused population. And so really every day, whatever it is that's needed in that day is what we manage. And then you just keep making sure everything else gets done while trying to figure out how we keep funding in place for the hotel and while trying to overcome some difficulties to build a new shelter so that everyone has a place to be 24/7.
With all of these major issues and really trying to care for humans, that's never a dull topic. And with the construction, everyone who's ever had any construction or remodel or anything, everyone knows that's so complicated. But there's another complicating factor with that, where there's a lawsuit pending between the city and Veterans Park Neighborhood Association. Are you worried about the fact that there's this lawsuit and that maybe it could impact construction for the new Interfaith Sanctuary?
Yeah, that's always been part of this equation of like a shelter, building a new shelter in a new neighborhood. It's never not been some sort of challenge like that. And we just keep, working and hoping to overcome each obstacle. Veterans Park Neighborhood Association sued the city of Boise on procedural error on at the 4th District Court level. The judge ruled in favor of the city of Boise and Interfaith Sanctuary. It's kind of the same story again, moving to the highest court in the land of Idaho, but the story hasn't changed.
So will this impact your timeline at all, or are you moving full steam ahead despite the lawsuit?
Yeah, we've always had to because, you have to still try and get this project up and running before it gets freezing cold and there's no more hotel shelters. So you just put your head down and you do what is necessary in hopes that we keep overcoming the barriers. And so the conversation at the Supreme Court level, it is something that we have to do, but there was no stay on our application. There was no freeze on construction. Nothing has ever stopped us from moving forward with the project and the process. So that's what we've done the whole way through.
Ryan Reynolds here from Mint Mobile. With the price of just about everything going up during inflation, we thought we'd bring our prices down. So to help us, we brought in a reverse auctioneer, which is apparently a thing.
Mint Mobile Unlimited Premium Wireless. How to get 30, 30, bit to get 30, bit to get 20, 20, 20, bit to get 20, 20, bit to get 15, 15, 15, 15, just $15 a month? Sold!
Give it a try at mintmobile.com/switch.
$45 up front for 3 months plus taxes and fees. Promo rate for new customers for limited time. Unlimited more than 40 gigabytes per month. Slows full terms at mintmobile.com.
This episode is brought to you by La Quinta by Wyndham. Your work can take you all over the place, like Texas. You've never been, but it's going to be great because you're staying at La Quinta by Wyndham. Their free Bright Side breakfast will give you energy for the day ahead. And after, you can unwind using their free high-speed Wi-Fi. Tonight, La Quinta. Tomorrow, you shine. Book your stay today at lq.com.
What's the timeline for the new shelter? When will it be open to the community?
Yeah, we're hoping October of 2025, we'll have that ribbon cutting and be able to move our guests to that one building, go back into one building, which will be fantastic.
Now, the October 2025 opening deadline is really important now because there is a ticking clock on the Red Lion Hotel shelter. And the Boise City Council recently decided to wind down funding for that, which means that by October 2025, those beds won't be available. How is this going to impact Interfaith Sanctuary?
Lindsay, again, it's like we have met up with this funding, the ending of the funding for so long. Like when we first moved into the hotel shelter, it was a temporary solution for a pandemic. And there was, funding that was coming from FEMA. But then that FEMA funding came to an end. So then they were like, oh my gosh, what are we going to do? We still need the hotel shelter. And so then CARES funding became available. And then CARES funding was coming to an end. We're like, oh my gosh, what are we going to do? And then ESG funding became available. And then City of Boise, and then Ada County. And so this has always been part of the story for a temporary solution. And so we're going to work really hard to be able to phase down the hotel with the understanding that at no point anyone should be moved out onto the street ever. But right now, based on our construction and how it's going, and I'm going to knock on wood, because right now things are going really well. And so hopefully we will be able to hit that timeline. If not, we might have to have another conversation or find another funding source, because no one wants to see families with children and medically fragile out on the street ever.
Absolutely not. And with these really narrow timelines and deadlines, are you concerned that some of our most vulnerable people could be left in limbo heading into winter?
Yeah, I think with my job description, I am constantly concerned because we do have a growing need within our community for families with children, with seniors, with medically fragile. And we don't have enough shelter beds right now at our emergency shelter for adults. And we can't take in new residents at the hotel shelter. So it's something that we're constantly thinking about. Luckily, we do have great partnerships, and we are working with Our Path Home and really making sure that as we need to find support and solutions outside of what we currently have, we do have a way of doing that. But you just can't take your eye off of any of it, because it's a constant changing number and it's going the wrong direction.
Yeah, and we've talked about that, how eviction filings have doubled in the past year. So there just is more and more pressure, even with these changes and these deadlines. And how does that impact how you plan ahead? How are you able to compensate for that?
Well, I think it's about education. Part of what the work we do at Interfaith is outreach and education. If we can make sure that our community understands about the real causes of homelessness, who people are who make up an unhoused population, how that homelessness happened is not quite what you think. There's so many different stories. And if you can keep building the understanding and hopefully the compassion, what has to happen is that communities have to get behind and make solutions be able to happen, as opposed to oppose solutions that need to happen. And so the good voice has to get louder. We have to show up to support these affordable housing projects. We have to show up when we're voting. It's really important who leads our city. Mayor McLean does not believe criminalization is a solution for homelessness. We need to make sure that we always vote for a leader who thinks that way, or else we're in big trouble. And so it's not just about working in homelessness and in shelter. It's about working in all the systems that are forcing people out of their housing and making it impossible for them to have a livable wage and all of that. So it all has to get fixed together.
Yeah, it sounds like we really can't just be reactive. We have to focus on proactive measures so that all of the pressure doesn't fall on you and Interfaith Sanctuary.
Yeah, it's helpful to have many people as part of a very interesting, intricate solution where there's many different ways to help lift someone back up.
When you were talking about education, I also think that is so important. We've talked a lot about the Red Lion hotel rooms themselves, but not necessarily who is in there. And that's really the most important factor, is the who factor, not the hotel room factor. So who currently has access to these rooms and needs access to this support?
Yes, so the original qualification for the hotel shelter when it was first opened in 2020, it was to move our most vulnerable, kind of qualified by COVID exposure. And at that time, what was determined was families with small children, medically fragile, and chronically ill. People who were not sick enough to stay in the hospital, but were far too sick to be released to the street or shelter during the time of a pandemic. And so we became like a medical intake. And we were taking care of people who were far too fragile to be within a system of exposure, or they were diagnosed with cancer, congestive heart failure, COPD, things that would put you at greater risk during the pandemic. And so we learned how to do respite care. We partnered with a few different health providers to bring direct service of home health and hospice to the hotel. And so we actually became a safe place for someone who was at end of life. Those programs didn't really ever exist until this hotel. And we were not allowed to deliver those type of care steps like the home health, because in an open dorm setting, there's no privacy. And so with the HIPAA laws, you can't get that kind of care, but at the hotel you could. And so the hotel became kind of an incubator of very needed programming.
Well, and there has seemed to be quite a bit of support for the City Council's decision to redirect funding away from housing people at the Red Lion, saying that, people should be in other more permanent housing situations. How do you feel about that decision in light of all the care that you provided, and in light of the community's response to the council's decision?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question, because I think we go in every day and we do our work. And then you'll read an article or you'll hear someone talk about, the hotel shelter. But I think what was never very clear was exactly what work was being done. And so I think on that night where we went to the work session and actually presented some of the data, I think that maybe the city council understood it in a much greater way, like, they've housed 77 families while they've been working within this system. 70 medically fragile have found permanent housing. They've helped 6 people, suddenly it wasn't just about this hotel shelter that was an expensive temporary solution. It was like this very hardworking machine that saved a lot of lives and created some very effective supportive services, because it was a place where someone could be 24/7. And I think when that was more revealed in the work session, it allowed them to see a way to at least help us stay within this system until hopefully we move into the new shelter. But the thing that has always been clear to Interfaith Sanctuary, we saw what that hotel shelter was allowing us to do, and we always knew it was going to be temporary. And that is what inspired us to go and buy that Salvation Army building. Who knew that it was going to take so long for us to be able to start and finish building this new shelter? But unfortunately, in this work, sometimes you have to muscle through the fatigue and figure out a way to just make sure that there's bridges, that there's no gaps, because the gaps are super dangerous. And I think that that's what we've kind of found together, the city council and Our Path Home and the partnerships, is hopefully a safe bridge to get us from the hotel shelter into the new shelter without anyone being moved to the street.
It seems like time is a big factor, but unfortunately not the only complication that you are facing. Let's jump for a minute to another complicating factor, the U.S. Supreme Court and their decision to overturn the Martin v. Boise case. And just a little bit of background for anyone who isn't familiar, the Supreme Court decided in favor of an Oregon town's decision to criminalize people who sleep outside, even when shelter beds are not available. Jody, what do you think about this decision?
Oh, it's so frustrating. It's not a decision and it's not a solution. It's an absolute no, move down the road. We don't want to deal with this. It's not the right conversation. I think everyone knows that. To criminalize someone for losing their home and using jail as an option for rehabilitation of that homelessness, I don't know how that fixes anything. The very idea that, if we make it illegal for you to sleep outside, they're going to move to a different town, or they're going to suddenly become very open to a shelter bed that does not exist. Because that's the problem too. Because you criminalize it doesn't mean that suddenly there's going to be shelter beds for everyone.
Yeah. No, it doesn't suddenly make resources.
It doesn't. It grows nothing. It just, it makes someone experiencing homelessness further homeless because it puts a lot more barriers on them.
I have a bad habit of going to Reddit and reading comments, and you should never read the comments, but I do.
Ever.
And I've actually seen a fair amount of people argue that cities should be able to enforce camping laws and regulate where people sleep, just like they can enforce every other housing code and housing law in cities. So how would you respond to a comment like that?
I think that's absolutely fair if that city figured out how to serve those who may have fallen out of their housing. Did they anticipate the need? Did they create enough shelter beds? Beds that can keep families together? Beds that feel safe for transgender? Beds that will help eliminate trauma because of someone's mental health? It's absolutely fair to say, hey, you guys can't sleep out here because we have every solution available to you that not only provides a roof over your head, but you'll feel safe and you'll have the resources you need. That's the perfect world, right? But unfortunately, most cities don't have the infrastructure to support what is their unhoused population yet. And so in the meantime, looking at short-term humane solutions feels much better than creating a law to make it illegal to be homeless. That seems like you're going the wrong direction. But I understand, no one really wants to see the homeless. They don't want to see the suffering. They don't want to have to step over them. The homeless that, are ending up on sidewalks and living outside, that wasn't their first choice either. I can assure you that there was a time where they had much greater hopes, but then the system kicked them in the butt, and trying to find their way back out is very complicated. And it's not near as easy as people think it is. When they say, why don't they just go get a job? Well, we've been trying to get them their ID back for 7 months, but we have no form of identification for them. So they can't get a job right now until we do that. Or, they have cancer and we need to get them chemo. It's so easy for people to say what they say until they actually know the stories.
Jody, Mayor McLean has said that this Supreme Court decision isn't going to change the city's approach, implying that sweeps of camping sites aren't going to suddenly start up and that the police won't start ticketing more. Do you believe the mayor?
I absolutely believe that the mayor believes solutions are far better than criminalization. And I know that she works very hard. Our Path Home, which is a public-private partnership between the city of Boise and many of the stakeholders who are doing the work, which I'm on, we are constantly addressing and talking about the real solutions And Mayor McLean keeps a very close eye on that. She can't watch everything and be assured that it's all going exactly by the book, but she sure does her best. And so I think what is not a perfect system is not as bad as it could be because of our leadership.
I think that is definitely an important perspective to keep in mind in these unprecedented times.
Yes, exactly.
Are you concerned about any kind of a trickle-down effect where even if Mayor McLean holds to her policies, doesn't change anything about the city's policies when it comes to homelessness and camping, are you concerned about what other cities in the region do and how that will impact Boise and Interfaith Sanctuary?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the thing that I thought about first when we heard about the decision. There is a real lack of resources for homeless support and services outside of the city of Boise. There's not a lot of options. And so now that this becomes a city by city choice, if the city of Eagle or the city of Meridian or Star or Cuna, they get to decide now how they're going to actually move through the way in which they manage their homelessness. And that means that criminalization is now an option. And if that is the case, will that move people to a more friendly, safer place like the city of Boise, where there are maybe more support and services, but there's not enough shelter beds? And so what does that do to our system? What kind of pressure will that put on our system? But maybe that doesn't happen. Maybe we do a very good job of like informing, going out and talking to all the different mayors, giving them options. Maybe that will help to create more collaboration for support city to city to city, because we can do that.
Yet again, another complicating factor for housing and homelessness is policing. And currently, there are 3 finalists for the role of Boise Police Chief. How much of an impact does a police chief have on Interfaith Sanctuary and the population that you work with?
An enormous amount. The chief sets the tone. The chief decides how integrated and involved their system's going to be in working in partnership with the homelessness services. And so this new position being filled, it matters a lot to us. We have a really great relationship with the Boise Bike Unit. We have really good community police response and things like that. It's not perfect, but I think it's probably better than most. And so I'm very eager to know who the new chief will be. And I very much hope that like he makes that a priority in his work, is working alongside us. And that's what makes or breaks our system. And Lindsay, you can feel really good. Like when you look out on the streets of Boise, the reason why you don't see a ton of people all over the place, it's not that we don't have a pretty serious problem. It's that we have a really, with intention, collaborative group of people that work really closely together across the board. So you would be so surprised to see who sits down together. It's the hospital systems, it's the police, it's the city, it's businesses. And that's why it's possible. And that's why I think we do such a good job here. I know it's scary and challenging and all of that, but also I'm super proud of the way in which we all work together.
Thank you. I am more proud of Boise after talking to you than I was before talking to you and finding out how much, not just that you're doing, but you are doing so much, but that the city is working with you. And I think sometimes we don't see that. And so it is just very refreshing to hear that while things are still complicated, that there is collaboration, that people are working together. So thank you so much for sharing that with us. That's all for today here on CityCast Boise. If you enjoyed the show, check out our Hey Boise newsletter for even more local news. We'll be back tomorrow morning with another great local story. See you then.